Welcome to the Secure the Grid Coalition's YouTube channel. Today, we're having a conversation with Lieutenant Colonel retired Tommy Waller of the Center for Security Policy. Tommy, could you give us a quick introduction to yourself and the Secure the Grid Coalition?
Absolutely. Yeah. So our Center for Security Policy, we're a 501(c)(3) nonprofit located out of Washington, D.C. We've been around for almost 40 years. And our mission is pretty simple. We provide uncompromised analysis on what threatens our republic and then unconventional solutions to keep Americans safer. Part of the uncompromised analysis is the fact that our organization is not funded by government at any level. We're not funded by any foreign sources, and we're not funded by any industry that can profit off of our recommendations. And so, as we talk through today, the Secure the Grid Coalition's effort, it's important to understand that the grid, the utility industry out there that we seek to protect, we're not funded by them, and we're not funded by any company that can protect them. We exist solely for the public interest, for the American people. Back to the Secure the Grid Coalition itself, this coalition was formed over a decade ago, really with the goal of raising awareness about the threats to our grid infrastructure, because we know modern civilization like the United States cannot live without electricity.
Okay. And I saw you the other day testifying in the state of New Hampshire's legislature on the Save Our Transformers Act. Can you explain what transformers are and why they're important to people?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll definitely get into the Save Transformers Act itself and how we might protect our transformers, but it's really important to understand what a transformer is, why it's so critical. So when you think about our big grid that we all depend on for electricity, what we really sometimes fail to remember is the distance that that electricity has to move from where it's generated to where we would use it, say at our home or business. The generation part of that electricity could come from anything from, a nuclear power plant to a coal plant to, solar panels or wind turbines. Wherever it's generated, it's normally not next to large populated areas. And what that means is that electricity, when it's generated, must be transmitted. It must travel over long distances, right? That transmission infrastructure, it requires for it to travel long distances, for the voltage to be stepped up significantly. So think high voltage, low resistance. You can push that electricity over long distances. And this is what we see when we drive down the road. We see these transmission lines, these big long lines. That's transmission infrastructure. Well, for that electricity to move those long distances and that voltage to be stepped up to be so high to get it to move, you need a transformer. That's what a transformer does. It steps up that voltage so it can be transmitted, and then when it gets to where it's going, it steps that voltage back down and then it distributes it to, where it's going to be used. So just think about that entire system. If the transformers are not there or if they're damaged and you can't step that voltage up or you can't step it back down, then all the rest of the infrastructure kind of doesn't matter. You can be trying to generate electricity somewhere and you can be trying to use it somewhere else. But without that linchpin, without that backbone of the transformer system, it won't work. And that's what makes it so critical that we pay close attention to our transformers and that we protect them from all hazards.
Okay, so I understand that, it sounds to me like the transformers are kind of the backbone of this whole machine, the electric grid. Um, but where do we get them and how easy are they to obtain?
Yeah, so unfortunately, our transformers are predominantly manufactured overseas. It is something that the United States produced for a long time, and then competitors, in fact, even foreign adversaries, the People's Republic of China, really cornered the market in transformer production, right? So through economic warfare, their doctrine of unrestricted warfare, they dumped into the international market grain-oriented electrical steel, a certain type of steel used for transformer manufacturing, to put out of business many of the other transformer manufacturers. And so we have a situation right now in the United States of America where most of the transformers, the high voltage transformers that we need, we can't produce ourselves. We have to get them from overseas, and the lead times are extraordinary, right? And so I want to share for a moment my screen to show what I'm talking about when we say, lead times, right? So think about right now, If we were to order a transformer, okay, this very day, right, what we're looking at is 2030, possibly. Think about if a large number of these transformers all of a sudden were damaged or taken offline and had to be replaced. That is a exceptionally long time, right? And so 4 to 6 years is what we see for the highest voltage transformers. And so this gets us into the discussion of the reason we focus on transformers and making sure that they are protected. Because if we take a look at why would we focus on transformers and why is it that they're so hard to replace? If you look at your screen now, you see two items, a Schnabel cart and a Goldoffer. There are only so many of these massive machines in the United States of America. And what you see are transformers on those machines. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about the number of these systems that we have in the US, but the number is sufficiently small that we don't have the ability to even move a lot of these transformers at one time. Okay. And I want to go back for a moment. I want to think back to over a year ago, right around the time of the presidential election. Mr. J.D. Vance, who became our vice president, was interviewed by Joe Rogan, and Joe Rogan asked him about electromagnetic pulse, which we're going to talk about momentarily. And the good news is that J.D. Vance said this is a fixable problem. The bad news is that what he said was, well, we just need a lot of spare transformers. What you're about to see is going to show that no, while we might need some spare transformers, we need to protect the ones we have. Imagine having to move these transformers. Okay, so you look at the Schnabel carts, the gold offer. Look at the speed. Okay, walking speed for the one on the left. Think about how long that would take to get across the country. The one on the right, you see the speed is about 1 to 3 miles per hour. So when you look at lead times, right? So transformer goes down, or we decide that one needs to be replaced, the clock starts 4 to 6 years for it to just show up in an American port. Then once it gets to an American port and it needs to be transported and it needs to go into one of these things, look how slow they move. Now look at what it takes to cross obstacles. Okay, so this is an example of a transformer having to transit across a set of railroad tracks. How long would it take to build what you see right in front of you there, that system of bridges to move that asset across one set of railroad tracks? And what you might notice is that the power lines themselves had to be lifted. Look at this. This is an example of power lines basically being taken out by a transformer moving from a Schnabel cart across a road system. Look at just the turns in a road, what it took for this particular turn to be navigated to move that one transformer. Okay. And then look what happens when you mess it up. So you got this asset that might cost $5–10 million. It took 4 to 6 years to produce. And if you don't have your plan together and it falls off the truck and gets damaged in the process, right? So that's why we focus on transformers. And the final thing I'll show you here is this transformer that you see in this picture. That's about the size of a football field, okay? That's about a $20 million asset. And what you see on the right-hand side of the screen there, all right, is that it takes tens of thousands of gallons of oil. It's like a type of mineral oil that's used for the cooling of the transformer just to be pumped in and out of those things. So in perfect conditions, absolutely perfect conditions, not counting the time it would take to move the transformer to the site, the replacement on the site is about a month long. Okay. And so as we think about all of that and the criticality of our transformers to our grid and what it would take to replace them, this is what brings us to the importance of saving the current transformers we have. We cannot afford to lose them.
Right. And they're such a critical piece of the electric grid, but the critical infrastructures of the United States all depend on the electric grid, don't they? So wouldn't a loss of transformers also cause us to lose other things other than electricity? What could happen if we lost a
It,
lot of these transformers?
absolutely. So you look at the consequences of grid failure, right? All 16 of our critical infrastructures depend on electricity. So you might think to yourself, well, hey, I'm not in the electric power industry. I don't really have to worry about all these things, moving transformers. Guess what? You have to worry about it because whatever you do as an American citizen depends on electricity. All 16 critical infrastructures, water, wastewater, everything from, government services to hospitals. There's nothing we do in the United States that doesn't depend on electricity. So what happens is a cascading failure where every other infrastructure upon which we depend fails because we lose electricity. And so one of the things that happened in analyzing all of this is back in 2016, there was a closed door meeting of some of the best minds out there between the government, the electric power industry, engineers, all of these various people who are coming together to look at exactly what we're talking about right now, which is how do we adequately protect the electric grid that we have? Okay. And what this meeting, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. What this meeting they came to a couple of conclusions. Okay. And so the number one thing was to prevent grid failure, right? So if we look at the slide that you see before you now, again, that you got members of the Congressional EMP Commission, the Department of Energy, the Department of Defense. You had the Idaho National Laboratory. You had engineers from ABB and Dominion, the Electric Power Research Institute, MITRE, Stratcom, all of these players together. And what they said, number one, was prevent grid failure. Okay. So don't let the grid go down. And this is going to be important for us to consider in just a moment when we go back to talking about New Hampshire, where I was last week testifying. Okay. Number one, prevent grid failure. Don't let the lights go off, right? Because shutting down the grid is extremely risky. It's completely unrealistic. This is their words, right? So the best policy is to protect the grid, to quote, fight to the last breath to keep the system running. These are not my words. These are words of the people in this meeting, okay? And what they said, as you can see, the high value quick fix was transformer protection. That's the low hanging fruit, right? And so this was 2016. This was 10 years ago. Okay. The good news is that after that meeting, there were some smart people that went about figuring out how to protect those transformers. That gets us into the discussion now of New Hampshire and many other states that seek to save their transformers. So let's take for a moment to talk about the Save Transformers Act. SAVE stands for Survey All Vulnerable Electric Transformers. Okay. If you want to protect the transformers, you've got to figure out which ones are vulnerable. And to figure out which ones are vulnerable, you need to do a proper assessment, a proper survey. Now, we're going to talk right now about a certain vulnerability to those transformers, one that persists in nature and also one that humans can induce. All right. I will state for a moment that transformers can be vulnerable to a lot of various forms of attack. Physical sabotage, cyber attack, supply chain attack. For example, we know that the People's Republic of China has shipped to the United States over 600 transformers. And we know that at least one of these was found to have a hardware backdoor that would allow them to switch it off, right? Physical sabotage, cyber attack, supply chain attack, and even regular terrestrial weather, okay? But what I want to talk about right now is the electromagnetic spectrum, okay? EMP, high altitude EMP, and solar weather, okay? Those produce something known as a geomagnetically induced current or ground induced current. It's a current that travels through the crust of the earth. And what does electricity always want to do? It wants to find the path of least resistance. And so I'm going to stop sharing for just a moment so that I can explain, right? What happens when the sun produces a coronal mass ejection? Okay, people say a solar flare. The flare is what we see with the speed of light, but a coronal mass ejection is what comes behind that flare. It's an ejection of highly charged magnetized particles that travel through space and unfortunately sometimes connect with the Earth's magnetosphere. And the effect is very similar to what a nuclear weapon does in the exoatmosphere. So a high altitude nuclear weapon detonated up in space, it also affects the Earth's magnetosphere. And so what happens either way, whether it's a nuclear weapon or a coronal mass ejection from the sun, from a solar storm, is there is a movement of the magnetosphere of the Earth. Anytime a magnetosphere moves, it heaves and it wobbles. It produces electricity, electromagnetic energy. So think about when you start your lawnmower, you pull on that cord, there's a magnet surrounded by copper wire. That's a magnetosphere. The movement of that produces electromagnetic energy that goes into your spark plug. In this case, that electromagnetic energy travels beneath our feet. So we might see the flash of a nuclear blast up in space. We won't hear anything, we won't feel anything, or we might see a beautiful aurora borealis, the northern lights as they're called, when a major solar storm strikes Earth and we're looking up. But unfortunately, what's happening beneath our feet, we don't see. This current traveling through the crust of the Earth's magnetosphere moving, heaving, wobbling, and that current looking for the path of least resistance. What does it find? It finds the electric grid, those high voltage transformers, those gigantic transmission lines, high voltage, low resistance. That current jumps right up into our grid, where through the grounding wire of those transformers that we just talked about that are so important and irreplaceable. And it travels right down those lines to the next transformer. Okay. And so it's important for us to understand that mechanism of harm, the ground induced current that comes from nuclear EMP or solar weather. And it's important to understand that we cannot deter the sun. We can pray and hope that our enemies don't hit us with a nuclear weapon in the exoatmosphere, a high altitude EMP attack, but we cannot deter the sun. It's a statistical certainty that we will be struck by a major solar storm that will do this damage. Going back to share my slides again, I want to show you how well we're protected, because right now, many Americans may think, well, surely the electric power industry, if they're aware of these threats, surely they've done something to protect us. And the answer is, unfortunately, they haven't. In fact, the standard that's been established by the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, NERC, that's been approved by the federal government, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, you can see on the right side of our page here, on the left, you see the NERC standard. Okay, so what you are seeing right there is the level of protection that the standard requires. So we talked about ground induced currents, GIC. It's measured in volts per kilometer. So think about that long transmission line. Let's just say it's 100 kilometers long. We're going to measure the strength of that GIC in volts per kilometer. So you could just do the math and say 100 times whatever that field strength is. The NERC standard, you can see right there for the very northern states, Minnesota, Maine, it's about 4 volts per kilometer. Where I was in New Hampshire last week testifying, it's about 2.4 volts per kilometer, because the NERC standard says that you scale down as you go from north to south in the geomagnetic latitudes. You scale down. So as you look at Washington, D.C., in the middle of the United States, you get about 2 volts per kilometer protection is what they would require. And then down in the south, in Texas and Louisiana, you get 0.8 volts per kilometer. That's what the standard requires. And what that means is that the utility industry can comply with this federally approved standard and do absolutely nothing to protect the grid. So they will say in congressional testimony, we are protected because we're in compliance with the NERC standard. And the truth is they are in compliance, but unfortunately that requires no hardware protection whatsoever. Now, if you look on the right of this chart, okay, and I want you to understand, this chart was in my briefings to the Secretary of Energy back during the Biden administration, to the Department of Energy during the Trump administration. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a moment, but also to the lawmakers in New Hampshire. So when you go through, if you watch that video testimony and I refer to this graph, you're seeing what they're seeing. And what you see on the right is real world solar storms, okay, in the green and the yellow. That would be past solar storms like the 1921 railroad storm, which produced about 20 volts per kilometer. The Carrington solar storm of 1859, we don't know exactly how much it produced, but we know it was far greater than 20 volts per kilometer. And then what you see in orange and red comes from nuclear EMP, high altitude nuclear EMP. 66 volts per kilometer is what the Soviet Union achieved when they detonated a nuclear weapon over present day Kazakhstan. 85 volts per kilometer is what the IEC, which is this is a recently updated standard from last year, from May 2025. They recommended protection against ground induced currents up to 85 volts per kilometer. One important point is this, where it is believed that the effect of GIC diminishes from north to south for solar weather. That's a belief. It's not proven. It's a theory. We know that GIC becomes stronger as you go south towards the equator for nuclear EMP. What that means is it doesn't matter where you are in the United States of America. If we want to protect against this threat, this very real threat of ground-induced currents, we need to do it at the level of 85 volts per kilometer. That gets us back to our S.A.V.E. Transformers Act. What does the S.A.V.E. Transformers Act do? It merely requires the utilities to do their job and conduct a survey of all vulnerable electric S.A.V.E. transformers. And that survey, what they do, in order to comply with this NERC standard, they have models that they've created where they put that number in. So if a utility is in Minnesota or Maine, they're going to type into their model 4 volts per kilometer. And predictably, the model is going to spit out that they don't really need to protect anything because there won't be any transformers that'll be damaged. Similarly, in Louisiana, they'll put 0.8 volts per kilometer, and predictably, they will be told, we have nothing to do to protect our transformers, we're fine. What we're saying is you're going to put the real number in, 85 volts per kilometer, regardless of where you are in the United States, and you'll see your model should spit out which transformers would be damaged. Now, the survey also requires that they create a spreadsheet that shows the point of origin of the transformer. Where was it manufactured? We talked earlier about China. Probably a good idea for us to know whether or not the transformer was manufactured in China. And so this survey is really only compelling the utility industry to do their job. Okay. Now, unfortunately, in the hearing last week in New Hampshire, there were a lot of statements made by the utility industry about the fact that they have operating procedures to take care of this. So I want to address that, but first I want to address the technological solution. So the good news is that after all this bad news that you've heard, this is a fixable problem. There is proven technology that exists that can fix this, and I'm going to show you literally the very photograph that I showed the Secretary of Energy, Jennifer Granholm, 4 years ago. Okay, 4 years ago. I briefed Granholm's advisory board almost a half a dozen times. And this picture that I showed them shows the technology. On the left, you see it's called solid ground. It's a neutral blocking device. Okay. And you see on the right the transformer. And it may be difficult to see above these men. There's a wire up there that it just connects to the neutral ground wire on that transformer. And it will sense that ground induced current and it will mitigate it. It will block it immediately. 3 of these units have been installed in the United States grid, and they have been working flawlessly, one for over 10 years. So the technology exists, it's proven. It was developed in conjunction with the utility industry, with the Electric Power Research Institute, with the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, with Idaho National Laboratory, with Oak Ridge National Laboratory, with the Department of Energy, at the request of the Department of Energy. And yet I had briefed, as you can see, August 2020, January 2022, June 2022, April 2024, and then November and July 2025, members of the Department of Energy, that this technology exists, it's ready to be deployed, and it's proven. And the cost to protect the United States of America, one-time cost, would be about $3 to $4 billion. Okay. It's also important to know the United States of America loses about $10 billion a year in economic loss from routine solar weather. The ground-induced currents we talked about, they pass through that transformer right there, and they go downstream and they ruin other equipment through harmonics that are generated in the system. Think about like dirty power. So the dirty power that comes from the sun, from naturally occurring solar storms, causes $10 billion of economic loss every year. That's not me saying it. That's Zurich, Lockheed Martin, and NOAA in a 2015 study 11 years ago. Okay. And so that means we lose $10 billion a year in economic loss, and we could fix that for 3 to 4 billion one time. Our leaders know this. They've been briefed this. They haven't not acted on it. And when you look at it at the state level, we analyzed this in Texas, and we looked at every single transformer in the ERCOT system. And we looked at what it would take to protect it against the ground-induced current and even the effects of EMP, which we didn't talk about E1 or E2. And when it's amortized over 30 years, the way that the electric power industry does their infrastructure investments, amortized over 30 years, it came down to about 80 cents per month for each of the ERCOT customers, each of the citizens of Texas that pays a power bill in ERCOT, in the Texas grid. It costs about 80 cents a month over a period of 30 years. Okay. It is eminently affordable. And so, but what did the electric power industry say when they were brought to testify in New Hampshire about this bill, the SAVE Transformers Act? First of all, the statement was made numerous times that such a survey could be, quote, unduly burdensome.
And I know that there would certainly be a lot more devices that would be affecting Eversource, so I defer to them in terms of the scale of this work. I can only add on top of that, I personally have learned whenever I hear anyone say it's easy for a utility to do something, it isn't necessarily the case.
We've seen that many times where
Yes,
we have petitioned, FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. We petitioned them about many different threats, and always the electric industry's response was that that it would be unduly burdensome for them to comply with this regulation. Those that testified also said that, hey, look, we're not here to oppose this. We will do whatever we are regulated to do. That was an important statement.
We're willing to do whatever the regulations require us to do, or whatever the state bodies are looking for us to do, right? It's just a matter of balancing the cost and making sure we keep affordability in mind.
Okay, what they're saying is they're not going to do anything that they're not regulated to do. And so this bill will force them to do this survey, but it doesn't force them to fix the problem. It just says, do the survey, tell us what you recommend to fix the problem, tell us how much it costs, and tell us how you recommend we pay for it. We're literally inviting the electric power industry to ask for help. But I want to warn the viewers. The electric power industry's response was that they have it under control because they have operating procedures.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The issue of load shedding is a little troubling to me. If my understanding of solar EMP is we have maybe a couple of minutes from the coronal event to the time you need to shed. Is ISO New England going to be able to shut down the entire grid? Because that's what it would take. You can't just shut off little pieces of the utilities. You have to shut everything down. And then in the event of a nuclear blast, there is no warning. If one of the North Korean satellites decides to blow up in the middle of the United States and wipe out all of the United States grid, it's gone. And there's no warning. There's no time to load shed. How do you deal with that?
All right, so there's two issues there, right? The first is the solar event, right? So we have, obviously in contemporary times, more monitoring of the sun and more advanced notice. And it does take some time for a coronal mass ejection to get to the Earth. There's some dependency on the magnetic field strength at the time of the Earth. There's a whole bunch of variables in there. but there is some time. So we do get notice, pretty far in advance of when a magnetic storm is about to approach. And, we have system operators 24/7 looking at the system. They are watching VAR flow. So VAR flow is a component of power where current is flowing. I don't want to get too deep into it, but, we do get indication on the system if there is, excessive current on the system and excessive reactive VAR flow, right? So the operators could take action. You wouldn't kill everything. You'd kill a piece of equipment or de-energize a piece of equipment, right? So that it wouldn't get damaged. For a nuclear device, I mean, that's a different scenario and well outside my expertise, right? That would be something of a national security issue, I would think, and something I couldn't really give you an expert opinion
Uh, So again, then load shedding an event of the solar event, it's the big pieces of the system, the big transformers, which means
Right.
they're feeding all the distribution downstream. So if you kill them, you've killed the whole system.
You would, and you would see.
You haven't taken out a little component. Can you explain how you said?
Well,
it?
again, it's connected to the greater system, right? So the whole Eastern Interconnect is interconnected. If you opened up some transformers, say at Scobie Pond, right, you're still connected to the system, right? It depends how much of that system is being impacted and how much of the system is being de-energized at the same time.
The operating procedures that they mention are what they call load shedding, which means turning the power off. Okay. And so I went to the committee and I provided, okay, on the front end, I provided written testimony that had the very things I just showed you guys, right? And then afterwards, I provided them a summary of the real, true facts related to the quote operating procedures. The industry claims that they will have time and they will have notice from the Space Weather Prediction Center to shut the grid down. We saw this week that NOAA, the Space Weather Prediction Center, predicted a G4 level storm to hit Earth, and their predictions were off. They missed it by a half a day, roughly. Those three neutral blocking devices in the US grid started to activate many, many hours before the predicted effects on North America, right? What that means is we cannot predict GIC, okay? And so the industry says we have operating procedures. We monitor the grid. When we see that the GIC is getting too high, we will conduct those operating procedures. Load shedding. We'll turn the power off.
Thank you. This is an easy one, I think. I just want clarification. When you say that the current protections process is to shut the system down, you're talking about just cutting power to everybody, all your customers, and just de-energizing the entire system?
Load shed, yes, sir, that's correct. That is ISO New England calls and dictates for when there are situations where you might need to shed overall load.
Now, this is extremely dangerous for a number of reasons. Number one, right now in the middle of winter, turning the power off for the American people, how much harm is that going to cause? We saw the power go off in Texas in Winter Storm Uri, and we saw over 250 people died in an outage that only lasted a couple of days. The economic damage we estimate to be over $100 billion. A solar storm in 1989 turned the grid off in Quebec for 9 hours. The 9 hours cost $13.2 billion. Okay, and that's what I explained to these lawmakers. And I reminded them that the Carrington solar superstorm in 1859 lasted a week. Okay, so it's not like you can just turn the grid off and turn it right back on. The second thing is when the utility industry turns the grid off, remember what that Department of Energy slide said from 10 years ago. It's extremely risky.
Andy Thomas, thank you for being here, first of all. And my question was also about the de-energizing the system. You've done this in the past, I assume, and what kind of a time frame are we looking at here? Are we talking about minutes, hours, days?
So let's start with the first bit of that. No, this has never happened before. I want to be clear on that. I don't believe there has ever been an instance throughout New England where any sort of load shedding has happened regarding a geomagnetic disturbance, a capacity deficiency, anything of the sort.
We call this the quote, great experiment, that the industry can shut the grid down when they see a solar storm coming. Notice though, that they say in the testimony, and you can watch it for yourself, we're going to watch it. We're going to watch the GIC. We're going to watch the grid. And when we think it's at risk, we're going to shut it down. Guess what? All those relays that they would use to turn the power off, they're not made to operate with GIC on them, with those direct currents in the system. What that means is when they go to try to turn the grid off, they're going to severely damage the equipment that they're using to turn it off. It means it might never come back on. So it's called the great experiment. It's never been done. And let me tell you something else. They say they have time. They say they have time to watch the space weather coming, that NOAA is going to give them this notice. A Carrington class solar storm travels at 6.5 million miles an hour. The sun is 93 million miles from Earth. What that means is somewhere around 15 hours between when we see the flare and it's coming to Earth, we have some level of notice that there might be a solar storm, but we don't know anything about the strength of the storm until it strikes the ACE satellite. The ACE satellite is 1 million miles from Earth. What that means is we have about 9 minutes. We got about 9 minutes notice between when it strikes a satellite to tell us what we think we know about the strength of it, for the entire electric power industry of the United States of America to decide to basically do its quote operating procedures, which is to turn the grid off. And that's right now their solution. When at this very moment, proven, tested technology exists that is affordable to protect the grid. And so it is our desire to get our lawmakers involved in the process of requiring the utility industry to analyze, to survey their system, to protect it with this technology. And be reminded that we don't make a dime from this. The people that produce this technology, it's a wonderful story, right? We're talking about a company, an American-made company from back in World War I, World War II, Crown Iron Works, that helped us win World War I and World War II. And it's third generation ownership. Got a briefing much like the ones I delivered in New Hampshire on EMP. And the business owner's spouse turned to him and said, you need to solve this problem. That was 18 years ago. Okay. And the person that delivered the briefing was one of the founders of our nonprofit organization, Frank Gaffney, who delivered that briefing. 18 years later, right now, we're working with the fourth generation of that company. Okay. That is producing this technology. And look, I will leave you with a video. Last month, I went to Minnesota where this is being produced, this solid ground technology. The last thing they do before they ship it off to a customer is they do a battery test where the device is operating in automatic blocking mode, and you touch a battery. I took a flashlight battery, my little flashlight out of my pocket, AA battery, and I went up and I touched the unit and it activated. It was amazing. And we'll show you this little video captured on an iPhone. We were filming this for the new release of the documentary Grid Down, Power Up, narrated by Dennis Quaid. So you will see this footage, the real footage, and all these details in the new film, in the film Grid Down, Power Up, when it's newly released very soon. But you get a sneak peek with this little iPhone video watching this thing activate. Super inspiring. And then it was extremely depressing to think that that device was being boxed up into a shipping container and shipped overseas to a foreign country. The manufacturer of solid ground consistently gets requests from foreign countries, and they are selling them to our allies right now. Unfortunately, they've also seen patent trolling from the People's Republic of China, and we have much evidence to show that China is deploying this technology, counterfeit solid ground units, across their grid. Last week, I emailed the Department of Energy an update to let them know that the People's Republic of China is deploying solid ground across the Chinese grid, while we here in America remain extraordinarily vulnerable. And we have an industry that will claim that their solution is to shut your power off. And so it's our desire instead to save our transformers and to keep the lights on by protecting the grid while we still have time.
So,
Yeah.
Tommy, what should people do if they're concerned about this issue?
Yeah, so look, I'm going to show you actually exactly what I told the people in New Hampshire because I did a number of briefings for citizens there as well. So let me share my screen with you for a moment because really there's three things that I would recommend. Okay. And so those three things are pretty simple. The first is prayer. Okay. So pray for our government's leaders, our industry leaders to do the right thing. It takes courage for them to break with the status quo. So we need prayer. Secondly, we need to be participating in the political process, right? So, the good news is if people are in New Hampshire, there's already this bill that's been filed. We right now see some momentum in the state of Tennessee and the state of Louisiana. There are many other states that could file this bill. We need to understand that it will need to necessarily take a regional approach because electrons don't care about state boundaries or political parties. So it should be bipartisan. And so we can get involved and participate in that process. If you are concerned about this, you can reach out to us. We will conduct briefings like this for your lawmakers and explain this to them and help them through this process. And then finally, we just need to be more prepared. So prayer, participation, preparation. The longer that we can be prepared to go without electricity, the more resilient we can be at the family and the community, the state and national level. And that leads me to one quick other thing, which is our resilient communities network that we're building. So we have found that there are communities that want to be more prepared, that they want to take steps to increase their resilience. And you can see an example right here. There's a county in Waldo County, Maine, where the emergency manager took a whole lot of steps to make sure that he could have an off-grid capable emergency operations center. Lots of the different things that we had recommended over the very, many years to help communities become more resilient, this emergency manager did. In fact, Mike, you, as the author of the civil defense book, had a lot of recommendations about how counties can create civil defense programs at the county level and how they can be more prepared. We now see this happening, and what our desire is to do is to interact with those counties, give them the solutions that we know about, learn the solutions that they've come up with, and then connect those communities together. And so that preparedness aspect is something that we would be happy to help with as well. So again, if you've watched this, the things you can do: pray, participate, and prepare. And until we have a new message for you, that's what we have for you for now.
Okay, Tommy, thank you very much. And I think that's pretty consistently the message we've been saying for about a decade on a
That's right.
variety of different threats we've covered. But saving our transformers, it seems to me to be a no-brainer. We're losing, 10 billion a year anyway on damage from these exact threats. And with a fraction of that investment, we could permanently take that threat off the table.
That's
So
exactly right.
very, very fascinating discussion. We have links in the description of other resources, and we encourage everybody to take these steps to save our transformers. Thank you for watching.